I'm 78 years old, living by myself in a house that once echoed with laughter. My name is Arthur Miller, and in the 4 years since my Eleanor passed, I've grown accustomed to the quiet. At first, the silence was deafening. It made me switch on the television just to have some noise in the background. Now I've learned to find a certain peace in that silence. It doesn't betray or deceive me. It doesn't look at me as if I'm a burden. Our home in Maple Creek, Ohio, is modest, but it's more than enough for one old man. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a view of the street, a kitchen where I have my morning coffee, and a front porch where Eleanor and I used to sit in the evenings, holding hands. After 52 years of marriage, loneliness is a wound that never quite heals, but I've learned to live with it. I spent my life as a high school history teacher. It wasn't the most exciting career, but it was steady. I taught generations of kids about empires rising and falling, about revolutions and wars. I learned to see the patterns of human nature, the ambitions and follies that repeat themselves through time. Perhaps that's why I became so adept at seeing the truth behind people's smiles and words. Eleanor and I had only one child, our daughter, Chloe. When she was young, she was my sunshine. Her blonde hair, a gift from her mother, her infectious giggle, her boundless energy. She loved to climb onto my lap while I read her bedtime stories. Eleanor often said I spoiled her, and she was right. I suppose that was my greatest failing. Chloe grew up with a sense of entitlement, feeling the world owed her something. She wasn't a bad person, just someone who was used to getting whatever she wanted. It started with dolls and new dresses, then a car when she turned 16, then tuition for college and money for a city apartment. Eleanor and I wanted to give our daughter the things we never had, but I fear we went too far. Everything changed when she met Mark Thompson. I still remember the evening she brought him home. He was a handsome, well-dressed man with a polished haircut and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He worked as a real estate agent and possessed the easy charm that successful salesmen often have. I felt a sense of insincerity from him immediately. But what right did I have to tell my 27-year-old daughter who she should love? "He's so good to me, Dad," Chloe would say, her face beaming with joy. "Mark understands me better than anyone." Eleanor was more perceptive. That night after Chloe and Mark had left, she told me, "That young man was looking at our house like he was assessing its market value." I dismissed her concerns. I wanted to believe my daughter had found happiness, even though a part of me knew Eleanor was right. Mark wasn't just appraising the house, he was appraising us. Our willingness to help, our retirement savings, our desperate wish to see Chloe happy. They married a year later. It was a lavish wedding, exactly as Chloe had envisioned. Eleanor and I used a significant portion of our savings to pay for it. But how can you put a price on your only child's happiness? After a honeymoon in the Caribbean, they moved into a house for which we also provided the down payment. I hoped that, with a solid start, they would finally stand on their own feet and build their own life. But the requests for financial help began within 3 months. "Dad, we have some unexpected expenses. You know how costly it is to furnish a new home." "Dad, Mark is having a tough quarter at work. We just need a little help to get through the month." "Dad, we want to take a vacation to de-stress. You know how important mental health is." At first I gave them the money without asking questions. Then I started to inquire what, exactly, it was for. Chloe would get offended, accusing me of not trusting her. And maybe I didn't. By then, I suspected Mark wasn't as successful as he claimed, and my daughter had no desire to work, believing her role was to be a beautiful accessory to their home. Eleanor fell ill just after Chloe's 30th birthday. Cancer. It's a word that shatters your world. We endured 2 years of fighting, of chemotherapy, remission, and relapse. I was by her side every moment, holding her hand when the pain was too much for her to bear. Chloe visited infrequently, always seeming to be in a rush. Mark usually waited in the car, not even bothering to come inside to greet his mother-in-law. "They're very busy," Eleanor would say, making excuses for them. Young people have their own lives. I stayed silent, but a bitterness was growing inside me. Couldn't she find an hour a week for her dying mother? Were Mark's non-existent career and Chloe's social events more important? After Eleanor passed, I was utterly alone. I couldn't bear to go home. Every object, every corner was a reminder of her. I just sat in the hospital waiting room, unsure of what to do next. My daughter didn't show up until the following day, after all the arrangements had been made. "I'm so sorry, Daddy. We were in a very important meeting we couldn't get out of," she said, hugging me. She smelled of expensive perfume and wine. The funeral was a small affair. Chloe insisted on cremation, though Eleanor had always wanted to be buried next to her parents in the old town cemetery. "It's more practical this way, Dad," she said, and I didn't have the strength to argue. It felt as if my own will had died with my wife. After the funeral, my daughter's visits grew even rarer, while her requests for money became more frequent. Sometimes it felt like she only remembered I existed when she and Mark needed another bailout. I gave it to them because it was the last thread connecting me to her. I was terrified that if I said no, I would lose her completely. 3 years ago, they asked for a large sum to start their own business. Mark wanted to open a boutique marketing agency. I gave them nearly everything I had left in my savings. The business folded in less than a year. When I gently asked what happened, Chloe replied with irritation, "The market is so competitive now, Dad. You just don't understand how things work today." Maybe I didn't, but I understood that they were living far beyond their means. A new luxury car, designer clothes, a vacation to Mexico. I started to suspect that not all the money went into the business, that a good portion had gone directly into their pockets. I turned 77 last year. Chloe and Mark didn't come to my birthday. They sent a digital card by email. They didn't even bother to call. That night I sat on the porch, looked at the stars, and spoke to Eleanor, as I often do. "We went wrong somewhere, my love. Where did we fail as parents?" The only answer was silence. But in that silence, I found a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in years, I admitted to myself that my daughter was not the person I had raised her to be. She was selfish, manipulative, and cold, and her husband was a parasite who fed on the generosity of others. The realization brought an odd sense of relief. I was no longer lying to myself, no longer making excuses for their actions. I saw them for who they truly were, and I decided I would no longer be their personal bank. The next time they called for money, the answer would be no. My resolve was tested a month later. Chloe called with another sob story about needing money for some urgent home repair. I listened patiently, and then, politely but firmly, said no. There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by a torrent of accusations. "After everything we do for you, you're all alone. Who's going to take care of you if something happens?" I almost laughed. Everything they'd done for me consisted of sporadic phone calls and even rarer visits, all of which ended with a request for money. "I'll be fine on my own," I replied calmly. After that, our communication became even more infrequent. They called only when they needed something, and I learned to say no. Sometimes, in moments of weakness, I still hoped. I hoped that a flicker of the little girl who used to curl up on my lap remained within my daughter. But each time, reality brought me back down to earth. Deep down, I knew it was futile to hope for a genuine family connection. They saw me as a wallet, not as a father. And yet, despite all the pain and disappointment, I couldn't bring myself to cut them out of my life completely. Chloe is my flesh and blood, the only part of Eleanor and me left in this world. It's a weakness, I know. But even then, I held onto a sliver of hope that one day something might change. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary, unremarkable day. I woke up at 6, a habit ingrained from decades of teaching, even though I'd been retired for 10 years. I drank my coffee and read the local paper, which I still subscribed to out of habit. I had oatmeal for breakfast, just as Dr. Evans recommended. Watch that cholesterol, Mr. Miller. It's important at your age. At 9, I started my cleaning routine. Eleanor used to tease me for being so meticulous, but since she'd been gone, the habit had become more pronounced. Every object had its place. When you live alone, the order in your house is one of the few things you can still control. I was dusting the framed photos in the living room when the phone rang. It was Chloe, which was a surprise. She rarely called on weekdays. "Dad!" Her voice sounded tense. "Mark and I want to come over on Saturday. We need to talk." "Is everything all right?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Everything's fine. It's just, well, we're having some financial trouble again." I sighed, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. "Chloe, we've been over this. I can't give you any more money. My pension barely covers my own expenses." "God, Dad!" Her voice sharpened with irritation. "It's always about money with you. We just want to visit our father, and you've become so suspicious lately." I didn't argue. It was pointless. We exchanged a few more strained pleasantries, and she hung up after reminding me they would be there for lunch on Saturday. After I put the phone down, I felt a wave of exhaustion. These conversations always drained me. I decided to go upstairs and lie down for a bit. I can't recall the exact sequence of events that followed. As I climbed the stairs, I must have caught my foot on the edge of the runner. Or maybe I just felt a dizzy spell, which had been happening more often lately. All I remember is the sudden feeling of losing my balance, a desperate grab for the handrail, and a searing pain that shot through my entire body. I woke up on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. The pain in my left hip was excruciating. I tried to move, to push myself up, but my leg wouldn't respond. The phone was on the table in the living room, so close, yet impossibly far. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness from the pain. It must have been several hours. I was saved by Mrs. Peterson, my neighbor, who sometimes dropped by to check on me. She had a habit of knocking once, and then letting herself in. "At our age, it's better to be safe than sorry," she always said. That day, I was immensely grateful for her forwardness. "Oh, good heavens, Arthur!" she cried when she saw me. "Don't move. I'm calling an ambulance." By dusk, I was in the hospital. The X-ray confirmed what I already knew: a fractured hip. "A common injury for your age," the young Dr. Chen said, his tone a mixture of sympathy and professional detachment. I was scheduled for surgery to have a metal pin inserted. "You'll need assistance when you're discharged," he warned. "Do you have anyone who can look after you?" I thought of Chloe and Mark and almost let out a bitter laugh. "My daughter and son-in-law," I answered, leaving out the details. I asked a nurse to call Chloe. She promised she'd come the next day. I spent a sleepless night, my mind racing, contemplating how this injury would change my life. At 78, a fracture like this is often the beginning of the end of one's independence. I would need a walker, maybe even a home care aide. I pictured my daughter's reaction to this news and felt a familiar weight settle in my chest. Chloe and Mark arrived around noon the next day. She walked into the room, carrying a small bouquet of flowers that looked like a last-minute purchase from the hospital gift shop. Mark trailed behind her, a look of bored annoyance on his face. "Daddy," Chloe cooed, kissing my cheek, "you gave us such a scare. Her perfume was overpowering in the sterile room, making me feel slightly nauseous. "How did it happen?" Mark asked, sinking into the visitor's chair. He looked like a man who was mentally timing how long he had to stay. I recounted the story of my fall. Chloe shook her head and muttered things like, "Oh, that's terrible," and "Poor Dad." But I could see her mind was elsewhere. "What did the doctor say?" she finally asked when I finished. "Surgery tomorrow, then physical therapy. And I'll need help at home for a while." Mark and Chloe exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. "Of course we'll help," she said, though her eyes wouldn't meet mine. "It's just, we're in a really tight spot right now. Mark's between big deals and we're having serious financial problems," Mark cut in, getting straight to the point. "That's what we wanted to talk to you about on Saturday." I looked at them, lying there, helpless in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm, and it hit me. They didn't see this as a tragedy. They saw it as an opportunity. "We need some help to get us through the next few months," Mark continued. "I'm waiting on a big commission that should come through in the fall." I'd heard that story 100 times. There was always a big deal, a promising client, a life-changing opportunity just around the corner, but it never materialized. "I have nothing to spare," I said, my voice heavy with fatigue. "My pension covers my bills, and my medicine. That's it." "What about your insurance?" Chloe asked quickly. "You have medical insurance, right?" "I do, but it won't cover everything." "Daddy," Chloe took my hand, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something in her eyes that resembled genuine concern. "You're going to need care after this. We could have you stay with us, but our house. You know, we're behind on the mortgage payments." "We could lose the house," Mark added with a somber tone. I closed my eyes. It was so predictable. Instead of offering me help, they were asking for it, as I lay in a hospital bed with a broken hip. "I have about $25,000 in my savings account," I said finally. "It's all I have left." Chloe's face lit up. "That would be enough to catch up on the mortgage, with some left over for your medical bills." "How am I supposed to get to the bank while I'm lying here?" I asked, already knowing their answer. "We could help with that," Mark began carefully. "If you gave us power of attorney—" There it was. I looked at my daughter and her husband, and I could see the greed shining through their masks of concern. They didn't see a father in need of care. They saw a financial resource that had finally become vulnerable. "And how do you imagine that would work?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's simple," Mark said, his energy picking up, sensing I hadn't immediately refused. "We'll bring the paperwork. You sign a power of attorney, and we can manage your bills while you're recovering." "And yours, I assume," I added quietly. Chloe shot me an irritated glance. "Dad, why do you always assume the worst of us? We're worried about you. If we lose our house, where will you go when you're discharged?" It was a valid question. I had no other family, aside from my sister Carol, who lived in Arizona and with whom I hadn't spoken in years. My friends were mostly gone. Some had passed away. Others had moved to be with their own children. My house, with its stairs, was now a death trap. Maybe it was time to consider a retirement community. "I'll think about it," I said at last. "There's nothing to think about," Mark said, standing up, signaling the end of the conversation. "You have surgery tomorrow, then rehab. You need to focus on your health, not on bills." Chloe kissed my cheek again. "We'll stop by tomorrow morning with the papers before your surgery." "It's all going to be okay, Dad. We'll take care of everything." When they left, I stared at the ceiling for a long, long time. A part of me wanted to believe them, to think that in a crisis, family ties would finally mean more than money. But I knew them too well. The next morning, they arrived early, just as they'd promised. The surgery was scheduled for 11, and the nurses were already prepping me, giving me the first dose of sedatives. "We have everything ready," Mark said, holding out a file. "This is just a standard power of attorney. It lets us handle your finances while you're incapacitated." I tried to read the document, but the words swam before my eyes. My mind was foggy from the medication. It was a comprehensive power of attorney, giving them full control over my bank accounts. I knew signing it was a monumental mistake. I knew they wouldn't stop at paying a few bills. But what choice did I have? Lying in a hospital bed, drugged and about to go under the knife, my future mobility hanging in the balance. I felt trapped. "Sign here and here," Mark instructed, pointing to the lines and offering me a pen. My hand shook as I scrawled my name. Chloe smiled as she took the signed papers. "There. Now you just rest and don't worry about a thing." A nurse came in to check my vitals. "Visiting hours are over," she said gently. "We need to get the patient ready for the OR." Chloe leaned down and kissed my forehead. "We'll see you tomorrow, Daddy. Everything will be fine." I watched them leave, the sedatives pulling me down into a thick haze. My last coherent thought before sleep took over was, I've just handed them everything I own. The surgery was a success. Dr. Chen told me as much when I came to in the recovery room. The pin was holding the bone securely, and with dedicated rehab, I had a good chance of walking again. "You'll need intensive physical therapy," he said, "and you'll start with a walker." The nurse would explain the recovery plan later. I nodded, still groggy from the anesthesia. The world was a soft, blurry place. The pain was a dull throb, muted by morphine, but I knew it was waiting for me. Chloe and Mark didn't visit the next day, or the day after. I tried calling their phones, but my calls went straight to voicemail. On the 4th day post-surgery, I asked a nurse to try reaching them. "No answer," she reported back. Her expression sympathetic. Should I keep trying? I shook my head. I already knew they wouldn't pick up. They had what they wanted. They didn't need me anymore. On the 5th day, my physical therapy began. The pain was agonizing, but I pushed myself through every exercise, knowing my independence was on the line. The therapist, a kind young woman named Ashley, was encouraging. "You're doing great, Mr. Miller," she'd say. "A lot of people your age take much longer to get moving." I held on to her words like a lifeline. I had to get better. I had to get back on my feet in every sense of the word. On the 7th day, as I was painstakingly making my way across the room with my walker, Chloe and Mark finally appeared. They looked tanned and relaxed, and they were wearing new, expensive-looking clothes. "Daddy, you're up and about," Chloe exclaimed with a burst of fake enthusiasm. "That's wonderful." I just looked at them, a cold anger building in my chest. Where had they been? What had they done with my money? "We took care of those bills for you," Mark said, pulling a few receipts from his pocket. "Here's the payment for the hospital deposit." I took the papers with a trembling hand. The amounts were far less than I expected. "Where is the rest of the money?" I asked, my voice flat. Chloe and Mark exchanged a quick glance. "Well, we paid off the mortgage debt, like we discussed," Chloe said. "And we had to buy a few essentials. It's for your own good, Dad. When you get out of here, you'll have a secure place to come home to." I gripped the handles of my walker until my knuckles were white. "How much is left in the account?" Mark shrugged. "Not much. But don't worry. Your pension should cover the rest of your medical costs." The reality hit me like a physical blow. They had taken it all. $25,000. The last of my life savings, the money I'd carefully set aside for a rainy day, for a nursing home, for long-term care if I ever needed it. It was all gone. "When are you being discharged?" Chloe asked, quickly changing the subject. "We need to get your room ready. In a week, if all goes well, I answered, my voice hollow. Perfect. That gives us time to run a few errands. Mark glanced at his watch. We should get going. We have an appointment. They left as quickly as they had arrived, leaving me in a state of profound despair. I was trapped in this hospital, my money was gone, and my future looked terrifyingly bleak. I couldn't sleep that night, replaying the scene over and over in my head. I felt betrayed, used, and discarded. But somewhere beneath the bitterness and resentment, a new feeling began to stir. Determination. I would not let them break me. I would recover, and I would find a way to take back control of my life. They thought I was just a helpless old man they could easily manipulate. Perhaps I was. But even a cornered animal will fight back. The days in the hospital crawled by. My world shrank to a routine of physical therapy, bland meals, and long hours spent staring at the ceiling or the sliver of sky visible from my window. Sometimes I read books brought by a nurse, Sarah, who had noticed I had no visitors. She was a young woman, maybe 25, with bright, kind eyes and a warm smile. And she seemed to take a genuine interest in my well-being. "You're looking stronger today, Mr. Miller," she'd say while checking my blood pressure. "Keep this up, and you'll be running marathons." I was grateful for her kindness. In a world where my own daughter saw me as nothing more than a bank account, it was a relief to feel a bit of human warmth. Chloe and Mark had not appeared since the day they admitted to draining my savings. I had called them a few times, but the calls either went unanswered or were cut short with curt excuses. "We're just so busy, Dad," Chloe would say impatiently. "Getting the house ready for you, taking care of business." I was starting to suspect they had no intention of taking me in after my discharge. They probably planned to just abandon me here, leaving the hospital to deal with the problem. I wasn't sure that was the worst outcome. The thought of living under the same roof as the people who had robbed me was unbearable. On the 10th day after my surgery, Dr. Chen informed me that my recovery was progressing well, and I could be discharged in 3 days. "You will still need assistance," he cautioned. "It's best to have someone with you, at least for the first few weeks. Is your daughter prepared to take you home?" I simply nodded, unwilling to admit the truth. I was ashamed of my family, ashamed to be a 78-year-old man who had been utterly abandoned. That evening I received the first text message from Chloe in over a week. I was picking at my hospital dinner when my old flip phone, which the nurses let me keep, buzzed on the bedside table. I stretched to grab it and opened the message. "Flew away with all your money. Bye." I read it again and again, unable to process the words. It had to be a joke. A sick, cruel joke. But why? Why would anyone write that to an old man recovering from major surgery? Before I could even form a coherent thought, a second message came through. This one was from Mark. It was a picture. A selfie of him and Chloe on an airplane, holding champagne glasses, grinning widely. Mark was giving a thumbs up, and Chloe was blowing a kiss to the camera. In the background, the logo of an airline that flew to Florida was visible. The caption below the photo read, "Thanks for the vacation, old man. We'll try to bring you back a seashell." I felt a wave of nausea so intense that the room spun. The dinner tray clattered to the floor as I lurched forward, my eyes glued to the screen. Mashed potatoes and gravy splattered across the clean sheets, but I didn't notice. All I could see were those smiling, triumphant faces and those words dripping with contempt. They hadn't just stolen my money. They were celebrating it. They had turned their theft into a party, a justification for a luxury trip paid for by the life savings of an old man who was, at that very moment, lying in a hospital bed. I don't know how long I sat there before Sarah, the kind nurse, peeked into my room. She saw the overturned tray, the phone clutched in my trembling hands, and my face, which was wet with tears, I hadn't realized I was shedding. "Mr. Miller!" she exclaimed, rushing to my side. "What happened? Are you all right?" I couldn't form words. I just held out the phone, showing her the messages. She read them, and her expression shifted from confusion to shock, and then to a deep, profound sympathy. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "I am so, so sorry." She helped me clean up, changed the soiled linens, and brought me a fresh tray of food, though I told her I couldn't eat. Then she pulled up a chair and simply took my hand. "Do you want to talk about it?" And so I talked. For the first time in years, I told someone everything. I told her about my life, about Chloe, about how our relationship had slowly decayed, about the constant financial demands, and about the events of the past week. The words poured out of me, and with each one I felt the crushing weight on my chest lighten just a little. Sarah listened patiently, never interrupting, just nodding or squeezing my hand in a gesture of support. When I finally fell silent, she sat with me for a moment before speaking. "You don't deserve this, Mr. Miller. Nobody does." "I must have gone wrong somewhere," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "With her upbringing, with our relationship. I must have done something to make my own daughter capable of such a thing." Sarah shook her head. "Don't do that to yourself. Some people, they're just built that way, no matter how they were raised." But I couldn't help but blame myself. All night as I lay awake, I replayed Chloe's life in my mind, searching for the moment I had failed. Maybe Eleanor and I did spoil her too much. We gave her everything she asked for, never said no, never established firm boundaries. She grew up believing the world owed her everything. Or maybe it was because I worked so much when she was a child. As a teacher, I had papers to grade and lessons to plan, and I was often preoccupied. Perhaps that created an emotional gap between us, a void that I tried to fill with gifts and acquiescence instead of presence and guidance. Or perhaps the problem was something deeper. Maybe I never taught her the true meaning of empathy, of responsibility, of respect. Was I a good role model for those qualities? I remembered an incident when Chloe was 12. She broke a vase, an heirloom that had belonged to Eleanor's grandmother. Eleanor was heartbroken, but Chloe never apologized. Instead, she blamed us for placing the vase in such a stupid spot. I should have insisted on an apology, taught her that her actions had consequences, but I let it go, wanting to avoid a conflict. There was another time, when she was 16. She took my credit card without asking and spent a small fortune on clothes. When I confronted her, she argued that she needed to look good at school, and that if I gave her a bigger allowance, she wouldn't have had to borrow the card. Again, I backed down. I increased her allowance instead of punishing her for theft. Perhaps I had always chosen the path of least resistance, giving in, avoiding confrontation, and in doing so, I had raised a daughter who saw that as the norm. Take what you want, and never mind the consequences or the feelings of others. But then another set of memories surfaced. Reading her bedtime stories, teaching her to ride her bike, comforting her after her first crush broke her heart. I remembered her snuggling close during thunderstorms, the handmade birthday cards, the pride in her eyes when she showed me a good grade on a report card. Somewhere along the way, that little girl vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating woman who could steal her father's last dollar and then mock him for it. By morning, I was emotionally and physically drained. The day nurse looked at the dark circles under my eyes with concern. "Rough night, Mr. Miller." I just nodded. After a breakfast I couldn't touch, I called my bank. Just as I feared, the account was empty. All $25,000 gone in a matter of days. The bank representative confirmed the funds had been withdrawn via the power of attorney I had signed. Legally, there was nothing they could do. "You can revoke the power of attorney, sir," he suggested. But recovering the funds will be difficult unless you can prove the signature was obtained under duress. I thanked him and hung up. I had neither the strength nor the resources to prove anything. And what would it matter? The money was already spent on plane tickets, a fancy hotel in the Florida Keys, champagne, and who knows what else. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, feeling a strange numbness wash over me. The anger, the hurt, the despair, it felt as if they had burned themselves out overnight, leaving only a hollow emptiness. I tried to pinpoint what I felt for my daughter now. Hate? No, the word was too strong. I couldn't hate my own child, no matter what she had done. Disappointment? Yes. But that was a feeling I had lived with for years. The closest I could come was a profound sadness, not just for the lost money, but for the lost relationship, for what could have been, but now never would be. Later that afternoon, a hospital social worker, a kind-faced woman named Lauren, came to see me. Sarah had clearly told her about my situation. "Mr. Miller," she began, sitting by my bed with a clipboard. "I understand you're in a difficult position. Dr. Chen says you'll be ready for discharge soon, and we need to figure out a plan for you." I told her I intended to return home, even though I knew it would be a challenge with my limited mobility. "You live alone, correct?" "No," she asked, scribbling notes. "And the house has stairs?" I nodded. "After this surgery, it's going to be very difficult for you to manage on your own, especially at first," she said gently. "We can arrange for a home health aide to visit a few times a week, but that isn't fully covered by insurance, and given your financial situation." She trailed off, but I understood. Without money, my options were severely limited. "There is also the option of a rehabilitation facility," she continued. "You would receive the round-the-clock care and physical therapy you need. Some of the cost is covered by insurance, but there is still a significant out-of-pocket expense." I sighed. A rehab facility sounded like a polite term for a nursing home, a place where they send old people with no one to care for them. It was my greatest fear. "Do you have any other relatives?" Lauren asked, seeing the despair on my face. "Anyone who might be able to help?" I told her about my sister, Carol. We hadn't spoken in years, not since a bitter argument over our parents' inheritance. She lived in a small town in Arizona and was 2 years older than me. "Perhaps we should try to contact her," Lauren suggested. "Sometimes, in a crisis, old wounds can be healed." I promised to consider it, though I doubted Carol would even want to speak to me, let alone offer help. After the social worker left, I lay there for a long time, trapped by the hopelessness of my situation. My savings were gone. My daughter had betrayed me. My future was a terrifying blank. I felt more helpless than I ever had in my life. And yet, deep down, a tiny spark remained. It wasn't hope. It was too soon for that. It was stubbornness. I had lived a long life. I had survived the loss of my beloved wife. I had endured loneliness and betrayal. I would not let this break me. That evening, as the hospital quieted down, I found Carol's number in my old phone's contact list. We hadn't spoken in over 15 years. I wasn't even sure the number was still valid. It rang 5 times, and just as I was about to hang up, someone answered. "Hello?" The voice was older, raspier than I remembered, but it was unmistakably her. "Carol? It's Arthur." There was a long silence on the other end. I could picture her in her small Arizona home, clutching the phone, shocked and wary. "Arthur," she finally said, "after all these years, is something wrong?" I didn't know where to start, how to bridge 15 years of silence with a sudden plea for help, how to admit my humiliation, my daughter's betrayal, my own foolishness. "I'm in the hospital," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I broke my hip. I'm in trouble, Carol." I explained the situation as concisely as I could, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice. She listened without interruption, only asking a few clarifying questions. When I finished, she let out a long sigh. "Oh, Arthur, I'm so sorry." I was expecting a lecture, maybe even a refusal. But instead, she said, "You're my brother. No matter what's happened between us, my home is your home." A lump formed in my throat. "Thank you, Carol," I managed to say, using the nickname I hadn't spoken in decades. "I don't know how to thank you." "Just focus on getting better," she replied. "I can drive up in a couple of days to get you. That should give you time to get everything sorted out there." When I ended the call, I felt a single tear roll down my cheek. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't a tear of pain or bitterness. It was a tear of relief. Maybe all was not lost. Maybe, even at 78, there was a chance for a new beginning. I couldn't sleep that night, but this time it wasn't from dwelling on the past. It was from the uncertainty of the future. I thought about Carol, about starting over in Arizona, about what it would be like to rebuild my life. But mostly, I thought about Chloe and Mark, about their smiling faces in that photograph. They had no idea I'd found a way out. They thought they had left me destitute and dependent. What would they think when they learned I was moving in with my sister? How would they feel when they realized their cruel game had failed? The thought brought me no joy, only a deep, lingering sadness. Sadness that my daughter had become a person capable of such a thing. Sadness that I had played a part in it. Sadness that the bond that should have been a source of love and support had become a toxic transaction. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a future without them, a future free from their manipulations and demands. It was a difficult picture to conjure. They had been a part of my life for so long, but I knew it was necessary for my own survival. Chloe Thompson woke to the bright Florida sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their hotel suite. She stretched, savoring the feel of the high thread count sheets against her skin. Mark was sleeping soundly beside her, his face peaceful. She smiled with satisfaction. They deserved this. They deserved this luxury. Slipping out of bed, Chloe walked to the window. From their suite on the 12th floor, the view of the ocean was breathtaking. A vast expanse of turquoise blue, meeting the sky. Palm trees swayed gently on the white sand beach below, where a few early risers were already setting up their chairs. Their suite was one of the best in the hotel, with a separate living area, a jacuzzi tub, and a wraparound balcony. $3,000 a night. The money her father had so carefully saved was disappearing quickly, but Chloe didn't care. The old man didn't need it anymore. She and Mark, on the other hand, deserved a taste of the good life after years of scrimping and failed business ventures. The thought of her father soured her mood for a moment. The picture Mark had sent him was maybe a little cruel, but hadn't her father earned it? For years, he had held his money over their heads, doling it out in small increments, making them feel like failures. Now they had simply taken what was rightfully theirs. Chloe pushed the thought away. She wasn't going to ruin a perfectly good vacation with guilt. She went to the minibar and pulled out a bottle of champagne. Why not? They were in the Florida Keys, on day 3 of their paradise vacation. It was time to live a little. The pop of the cork woke Mark. He propped himself up on his elbows, his hair a mess. "Champagne for breakfast?" he mumbled with a grin. "I like your style." Chloe poured 2 glasses and handed one to him. "To us," she said, clinking her glass against his. "And to our new beginning." Mark took a sip. "Isn't it a little early to celebrate? Your father's money isn't going to last forever. We need a plan." Chloe rolled her eyes. Mark was always like this, finding something to worry about, even in a moment of victory. "Relax, honey. We still have about 15 grand left. That's enough for a couple of weeks here, and then we'll figure something out." Maybe we'll finally launch that online consulting business you've been talking about. Mark shook his head, but didn't press the issue. Instead, he picked up his phone. "Hey, check this out," he said, scrolling through a news site. "There's some tropical storm heading this way. Hurricane Leo, they're calling it." "So?" Chloe asked, taking another sip of champagne. "It's Florida. There's always a storm somewhere." "I don't know," Mark said, his brow furrowed as he read. "They're saying this one could be serious. Some of the hotels on the outer keys are already preparing." "We're on one of the main keys," Chloe said dismissively, "and in the best hotel. I'm sure they know what they're doing." She stood and walked toward the bathroom, ready for a long, luxurious shower before heading down to the breakfast buffet. It would be a shame to miss the champagne and oysters because of some storm that would probably blow over. Later, as they ate on the restaurant's terrace, they noticed hotel staff beginning to secure the outdoor furniture and take down the large beach umbrellas. The sky was growing overcast, and the wind was picking up. "See?" Mark said, gesturing toward the workers. "Something's definitely up." Chloe was starting to feel a flicker of unease. She didn't want anything to spoil their perfect trip. "Let's just ask at the front desk," she suggested, finishing her third mimosa. "If it's serious, they'll tell us." The lobby was buzzing with activity. A line had formed at the reception desk. When it was their turn, the clerk, a young woman with a strained smile, confirmed their fears. "Hurricane Leo has been upgraded to a Category 3, she explained. "The authorities are recommending a mandatory evacuation of all coastal areas, including this hotel. All guests must vacate the premises by 6 p.m. this evening." "Evacuate?" Chloe asked, her voice rising. "But we just got here." "I understand your frustration, ma'am," the clerk said with practiced calm. "The hotel is arranging buses to transport guests to designated shelters inland. You will, of course, be refunded for the unused nights of your stay." Mark and Chloe stared at each other in disbelief. Their perfect vacation was turning into a disaster. "What if we decide to stay?" Mark asked. "This is a solid building. We're on the 12th floor." The clerk shook her head. "We can't force you to leave, sir, but we strongly advise against it. Once the evacuation order is in effect, the hotel will cease all services. There will be no staff, no food, and we anticipate power and water outages." "But we paid for a suite," Chloe protested. $3,000 a night, and you want us to go to a shelter?" "Ma'am, your safety is our priority," the clerk repeated. "This storm is expected to be extremely dangerous." Back in their room, they argued. Mark thought they should evacuate. Chloe was adamant about staying. "Look at this place," she said, gesturing around the opulent suite. "This hotel was built to withstand anything. A shelter will be a crowded gymnasium. No privacy, no comfort. We paid for luxury, and I'm not giving it up." "But if the storm is as bad as they say," Mark began. "It's an overreaction," Chloe cut him off. "They always exaggerate. We're on the 12th floor, Mark. What's going to happen to us on the 12th floor?" In the end, Mark relented. He knew it was pointless to argue with Chloe once her mind was made up. They decided to stock up on supplies, just in case. The small shop in the hotel lobby was packed, its shelves emptying fast. They managed to grab a few bottles of water, some crackers, and a bag of trail mix. By evening, the hotel was eerily quiet. Most of the guests had left. That night, Chloe was woken by the howling of the wind. It was a terrifying sound, like a freight train roaring past their window. She peeked through the curtains. The ocean was a churning, angry, grey mass. Giant waves crashed onto the shore, and the palm trees were bent nearly horizontal. Rain hammered against the glass with such force she was afraid it would shatter. "Mark," she said, shaking him awake. "Mark, wake up! The storm is here, and it's bad." He got up and looked out the window, his face paling. "Maybe we should have left," he said quietly. Chloe felt a surge of irritation. "It'll be fine," she snapped. "We're on the 12th floor." The power went out around 4 a.m., plunging them into darkness. The only sounds were the shriek of the wind and the pounding rain. Their cell phones had no service. They were completely cut off. They spent the day huddled in the room, listening to the hurricane rage outside. Around noon, water began to seep in under the balcony door. At first it was just a trickle, but soon it was a steady flow. Mark tried to block it with towels, but it was useless. "How is the water getting this high?" Chloe asked, watching in horror as the expensive carpet became soaked. "It's not the ocean," Mark explained. "It's the rain. The drainage systems can't handle this much water." By late afternoon, they heard shouting in the hallway. The few other guests and staff who had remained were scrambling up the stairwell. "The lower floors are flooding," a hotel employee yelled as he ran past. "The water is rising fast. We have to get to the roof." The reality of their situation finally hit them. This was dangerous. They grabbed their bags, documents, the remaining cash, their dead phones, and joined the small group heading for the stairs. The elevators were out, and the stairwell was dark and slick with water. Climbing the stairs, they found about 30 other people guests and staff huddled in a top-floor banquet hall. Someone had set up a makeshift shelter with blankets on the floor and a small supply of bottled water and snacks. "This isn't how I pictured our vacation," Chloe muttered, sinking into a corner. The night was long and miserable. The next morning, they heard the thumping of a helicopter. A Coast Guard chopper was hovering over the hotel. One by one, they were airlifted from the roof. "Essentials only," the rescuer shouted over the wind. Chloe had to leave behind her new designer handbag and the rest of her shopping. All she had was her wallet and her phone. The flight was terrifying. They were taken to a high school gymnasium that had been converted into a mass shelter. It was a scene of controlled chaos. Hundreds of cots, crying children, and long lines for the bathrooms. They were given 2 scratchy blankets, 2 bottles of water, and a bag of dry crackers. "This can't be happening," Chloe whispered, looking at the grim surroundings. "We paid $3,000 a night for a suite, and now we're sleeping on cots in a gym." Mark looked utterly defeated. "At least we're alive," he said, gesturing to a TV in the corner that was showing footage of the devastation. Entire neighborhoods were underwater, but Chloe wasn't listening. All she could think about was the money, the luxury, the perfect life that had been snatched away from her. Later that night, as Mark slept, Chloe cried silently into her lumpy pillow. She cried for her ruined vacation and her lost money. But deep down, she was crying for something else. Her father's face kept appearing in her mind, not angry, but sad and disappointed. What would he think if he could see her now? Would he laugh at the irony? Or would he, even after everything, feel sorry for her? For the first time, she felt a pang of something that felt like regret. She had destroyed her relationship with her father for a fantasy, and now the fantasy had turned into a nightmare. She didn't even know if he was still alive. Eleanor arrived, as promised, 2 days later. I hadn't seen my sister in 15 years, and time had changed her, as it had changed me. Her hair was completely grey, and her face was lined with wrinkles, but her eyes were the same clear blue I remembered from our childhood. "Arthur," she said, giving me a careful hug. "It's so good to see you." I felt a lump in my throat. We had wasted so much time. Eleanor handled all the discharge paperwork with brisk efficiency. The nurse, Sarah, came to say goodbye. "You take care of yourself, Mr. Miller," she said, squeezing my hand. "And don't you let anyone treat you that way again." Before we left, I insisted we stop by my house. I needed to get a few personal things documents, and the photos of Eleanor I couldn't bear to leave. I also wanted to leave a letter for Chloe and Mark. I knew they would eventually show up, expecting to find me broken and dependent. The house felt cold and empty. With Carol's help, I gathered what I needed. Photo albums, my wife's favorite brooch, a few changes of clothes. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote, "Chloe and Mark, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I have gone to live with my sister Carol in Arizona. I will not be back. I knew what you planned to do from the moment you walked into my hospital room. I saw the greed in your eyes. I knew you never intended to care for me. You only wanted my money. I signed the power of attorney because at that moment I felt I had no other choice. The money you stole, the $25,000, was my entire life savings. It was all I had. Now I have nothing but my small pension. I have filed a report with the police for theft. I don't know if they will pursue it, given the power of attorney, but I wanted your actions to be on record. As of today, I am cutting all ties with you. You are no longer my family. Do not try to find me. Do not call. Do not write. You ceased to exist for me the moment you sent that picture from the airplane. I hope you enjoyed your vacation in Florida. I hope the money brought you as much joy as it would have brought me security in my old age. Arthur Miller." I left the sealed envelope on the kitchen table. We walked out of the house, and I didn't look back. I was ready for a new chapter. The drive to Arizona was long, but Carol and I talked for hours, healing the wounds of the past 15 years. Her small house was warm and welcoming. She introduced me to her friends, a lively group of seniors who played cards, volunteered at the local library, and argued about politics. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I started helping out at the community center, offering free history tutoring to high school students. It gave me a sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Chloe and Mark returned from their disastrous vacation. I learned later from my old neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, what had happened. They arrived home exhausted and broke. The first thing they did was drive to my house, likely expecting to find me there, helpless and ready to be managed. They were shocked to find the house locked and dark. "Arthur's gone," Mrs. Peterson told them when she saw them trying the door. "Left a few days ago, moved to Arizona to be with his sister, said he wasn't coming back." According to Mrs. Peterson, they looked stunned. They used a key they had to let themselves in and found my letter on the kitchen table. She couldn't hear what they said, but she saw them through the window, arguing, their faces pale and drawn. The reality of their situation must have hit them hard. Not only had they squandered the money, but they had also lost any hope of a future inheritance, and, more importantly, the safety net they had always taken for granted. Their greed had backfired spectacularly. Did they learn a lesson? Did they change? I don't know. And I realized I no longer cared. That part of my life was over. One evening, Carol and I were sitting on her porch, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Cutting ties with your daughter, leaving everything behind." I thought for a moment. Did I? I missed the little girl with blonde pigtails, but that girl was long gone. The woman she had become was a stranger to me. "No," I said, and I meant it. "I have no regrets. I did everything I could for her. Sometimes you have to accept that some people can't be saved, and it's not your fault." Carol nodded and squeezed my hand. "You deserve to be happy, Arthur. We both do." And she was right. At 78, I had found a new life, a life of peace, free from manipulation and disappointment. A life where I was valued for who I was, not what I had. As for Chloe and Mark, their greed left them with nothing. No money, no family, no one to bail them out of their next self-made crisis. And perhaps that was the only justice that mattered. In the end, we all get what we deserve. I found peace. They were left with the consequences of their choices, forced, for the first time in their lives, to rely only on themselves.